Hello, my name is Rosie Bennett. And 5 days ago, I walked into a stranger's mansion to return a forgotten scarf, only to find my mother's face smiling at me from a gold-framed portrait on the wall. A woman who'd never stepped foot in that house. A woman who spent her whole life hiding from the people who lived there. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just missing a father. I was standing inside the life that was stolen from us. The house smelled like wealth, old money, lemon polish, and something colder underneath, like air that hadn't been stirred by real people in a long time. I stepped inside, only because I didn't think anyone would answer the door. It had been cracked open when I knocked, just wide enough for my nurse's badge to catch the light. I called out, "Hello," once then again. No answer. The scarf I was returning, the one a patient's wife had left during visiting hours, hung limp in my hand. I should have left it on the doorstep. I should have walked away. But something pulled me forward. Maybe it was the silence. Or the grandness. The kind of place that reminded you you'd never be invited here unless you were carrying something for someone else. Looking back now, I should have seen it coming. The light filtered through the stained glass in patches of red and gold, casting the marble floor in warmth that felt fake. I moved through the foyer slowly, trying not to touch anything, trying not to feel anything. But then I saw it. Just above the piano, in a perfect gold frame, was her face. My mother's face. She looked younger, carefree. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and her eyes, my eyes, sparkled in a way I hadn't seen in years. She was laughing at someone just off camera. My hand moved before my body gave permission. I reached out and pressed 2 fingers against the glass. Cold. Real. Not a trick of the light. "That's not possible," I whispered, because if this photo was real, then everything I thought I knew was not. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. The silence pressed in as I stood frozen. The hum of an unseen refrigerator in the distance. My own pulse in my ears. The tension in my fingertips, still resting against her smile. Every memory I had of her looked nothing like this. This woman, this light, had been gone long before I was old enough to ask why. I heard something creak behind me. A door, maybe. My heart jumped. I turned, but no one was there. No sound, no movement, just that same unbearable stillness. I backed away from the photo. My chest felt tight. The scarf still dangled from my hand, limp and forgotten. I didn't leave it. I didn't speak. I just left. That's where it all started. Outside, the heat slapped me back into myself. I rushed down the steps and didn't look back at the mansion, at that grand facade, hiding something I couldn't name yet. Not until I got home. The apartment was dim. The only light coming from a flickering kitchen lamp Maura always forgot to replace. My mother, my Maura, was asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket so thin it looked like gauze. The fan rattled above her, pushing warm air around like a joke. I stood in the doorway for a full minute watching her breathe, trying to line up the woman in the gold frame with the one lying there. They didn't match. Not anymore. Not since the illness. Not since the coughing started. Not since she gave up everything. A part of me wanted to wake her, to ask, to shake her shoulders until she told me what the hell her picture was doing in someone else's house. But I didn't. I knew what she'd do, deny, deflect, distract. She was always good at that, at rewriting pain into practicality. So I went to the hallway drawer, the one she kept locked, the one she never talked about. I didn't need a key. I pried it open with a spoon. Quietly, my hands moved with a steadiness I didn't recognize, like something else had taken over, something older, something tired of being lied to. Inside was a stack of unpaid bills, a cracked photo frame with no photo, and one envelope. It was yellowed at the edges, sealed, postmarked 2005, addressed to Harlan Adams. I stared at the name, the handwriting. It was hers. I would have known it even if it had been written in invisible ink. My fingers trembled as I peeled it open, trying not to rip the corners. The letter wasn't long, but it burned. If you're reading this, I chose not to disappear. But if you never do, I loved you, and I never meant to be forgotten. That sentence didn't just shake something loose. It tore a hole straight through the floor of my reality. Because my mother hadn't vanished. She'd been erased. And now, someone had to answer for that. I sat on the edge of the bed, the letter in my lap. The room felt smaller, my breath shallower. Every memory felt suspect now. Rehearsed lines, stories that changed slightly over time, timelines that didn't quite align. If she never meant to disappear, then who made her vanish? I said it aloud without thinking. Mom, what else have you been hiding from me? She stirred but didn't wake. I didn't try again. Instead, I picked up my phone, opened a browser, and typed. Harlan Adams, Charleston, Mansion, Adams Foundation, and waited for the truth to load. The search results glowed on my screen long after my eyes began to ache. I didn't know exactly what I expected, maybe a blurry headshot, maybe nothing at all. But the name appeared everywhere, on donation plaques, at charity galas, in headlines about scholarships and opportunity pipelines. It felt like staring at some distant star I was somehow orbiting without permission. I closed the browser, only when my hand began to shake again. I sat there until the lamp dimmed, until the fridge hummed on, and off like it was breathing with me. I didn't sleep. I just waited for the sun to peel its way through the thin curtains and expose what the night had forced me to see. That's where the next part began. Maura shifted on the couch the moment dawn softened the room. Her breathing caught like her dreams had tripped her on the way out. I moved toward her without thinking. That letter, rested on the coffee table between us, its torn edge still accusing. I sat beside her and felt something heavy inside me settle into place. Who is Harlan Adams? My voice didn't break. It didn't rise. It came out flat, too flat. The kind of tone people use right before they walk away for good. Her eyes snapped open. For a second, she didn't look like my mother. She looked like someone caught trespassing in her own life. Her gaze dropped to the envelope. Her shoulders sagged so quickly I thought she might collapse. Rosie, she swallowed hard. Please put that away. But I couldn't. Not anymore. I'd lived my whole life looking at empty corners, accepting half answers, pretending I didn't notice her flinch whenever someone asked about my father. She lifted the blanket and sat up slowly. Her breath came uneven, as if she were bracing for an impact she'd spent 20 years outrunning. She looked like someone watching a noose being tied and knowing it's hers. I was 24, she began. I was in love. I was stupid. You weren't stupid, I said, but she shook her head before I finished. You don't know how these people work." Her voice gained a strain I'd never heard before. "His mother, Catherine, she found out about me. She found out about you. And she—" The words tangled in her throat. She pressed a hand to her eyes, but the tears still slipped between her fingers. "She sent men to my apartment, told me if I stayed, she'd have me arrested for theft. She said she'd ruin me, make me disappear, so completely no one would ever remember I existed." The word disappear hit me like a slap. My pulse thudded against my ribs. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" Her laugh came out broken. "You were a baby, Rosie. You deserved a life without their poison." She looked away then, far away, as if trying to find the girl she used to be. "I didn't run because I wanted to," she whispered. "I ran because I was told I'd be erased if I stayed." She went quiet, and the room seemed to shrink. The air felt too thick. My heartbeat felt too loud. She wasn't done. She was gathering courage she no longer had to spare. "I thought I could raise you alone. I thought maybe one day he'd find us. But then—" Her voice cracked, splintering like thin glass. I found myself in a motel room, staring at a bottle of pills. The words lodged somewhere deep inside me. "I didn't take them," she said quickly, shaking her head as if she could erase the image from both our minds. "At the clinic the next day, they let me hear your heartbeat. It was so small, so strong. I realized I had something worth fighting for, even if no one else thought I deserved to. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything." We sat in silence for a long time, the kind that doesn't comfort or heal, the kind that marks everything that's been lost. Later that afternoon, I left the apartment just to breathe. The sun felt too bright, but I walked anyway, past the corner store, past the bus stop, past the streets where Maura had always tried to make our life look good enough. I ended up near a gated community. The houses there looked like they'd never known struggle or sacrifice. And then I saw her, my mother, in a groundskeeper's uniform, kneeling in front of a rose bed, her hands buried in dark soil that didn't belong to her. A little girl, probably 6 or 7, pedaled a pink bike down the driveway, laughing the way only kids who've never encountered loss can laugh. Maura watched her for a moment, just a second, but I saw her knuckles tighten around the shears. I saw what that moment took from her. That could have been me. That could have been our driveway. I didn't stay. I couldn't. I walked home with that image lodged in my chest like a stone I couldn't swallow. When I returned, Maura was asleep again, exhausted by the weight of the past she'd finally named. I knelt beside the couch, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. For the first time, I saw the grief she carried, not as weakness, but as proof she'd survived something I couldn't yet understand. "You shouldn't have had to protect me from that," I whispered. The words tasted like regret. But another thought rose up, sharp and certain. A thought I didn't say loud enough for her to hear. "I'm not going to be erased like you were." I stood, the room dim again, shadows stretching long across the carpet. Something in me had shifted. I felt it settle into place like a decision made long before I ever understood it. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. The air in the apartment felt heavier the next morning, as if the truth hanging between my mother and me had seeped into the walls overnight. I moved quietly, not wanting to wake her, but also not wanting to sit still with the thoughts that kept circling my mind. Something in me had shifted last night, something sharp, something steady. I didn't recognize it yet, but I wasn't afraid of it either. Before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed my phone again. The name Harlan Adams still waited in my search bar like a challenge I had finally learned how to accept. I tapped it, watched the page refresh, and scrolled through the pictures that now felt strangely personal. His smile looked practiced, the kind used by men who had never been told no. Under one photo was a caption that made my jaw tighten, from ruin to renewal, a journey through loss. He wrote a book about surviving loss. How poetic! He just forgot to mention me. That's where it all started. I found the contact form on one of the foundation's pages. Meeting requests, sponsorship inquiries, event coordination. Nothing personal, nothing human. I created a new email account, hands steady in a way that almost scared me. Then I typed. You knew someone named Maura 25 years ago. She didn't disappear. She was pushed. No signature. No hint of who I was. I read it twice, pressed send, and waited for my stomach to drop. It didn't. Instead, something inside me straightened, like a spine I hadn't used in years, finally remembering its purpose. I didn't know what would come next. Hours passed with no reply. I folded laundry. I wiped the counters. I checked on Maura every few minutes, afraid she might wake and sense the storm I had just invited. But sometime after noon, my phone buzzed. Come to the office tomorrow. Noon. No greeting. No explanation. Just that. I stared at the screen until the room blurred, not from fear, but from the weight of everything I'd been denied. Then I exhaled long and controlled and whispered, "All right." The next morning, I put on the only blazer I owned, the one I used for job interviews when I still believed the world played fair. I tied my hair back. I didn't try to look older or younger or softer. I just tried to look like someone who belonged in her own life. The office tower downtown felt too tall, too glassy, too clean. The kind of place that reflected every flaw back at you, with interest. I pressed the elevator button and watched my hand shake, not from weakness but anticipation. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. He was waiting in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the water. His hair was silver, not gray, and his posture was the kind that came from a lifetime of comfort. When he looked up and saw me, something in his expression broke open. "Your eyes," he whispered, almost to himself. "You look like someone I used to." He didn't finish. I reached into my bag and pulled out Maura's letter, the one she never mailed. I slid it across the table, careful not to touch him. His fingers hovered over the envelope for a moment before he opened it. He read the first line, then the second. Then he stopped breathing. "No," he murmured. "No, this isn't." His voice cracked in a way that didn't match the polished man in the photographs. I was told she aborted. The word punched the air out of my lungs. I steadied myself. By who? He answered so quickly it felt rehearsed. "My mother." His hands shook now. "She gave me a letter. Not this one." He stood, walked to a cabinet, unlocked a drawer with a key he kept on a chain around his neck. From inside, he pulled out another envelope, worn, handled, cherished. My pulse hammered as he opened it. The handwriting on the front was identical to Maura's, but the message inside was wrong. Detached. Cold. "I can't keep the baby. I don't want your money. Don't contact me again." My stomach dropped. Even the signature felt off. letters too rigid, spacing too precise. We laid the two notes next to each other, side by side. The lie looked almost childish. The strokes in Maura's real letter curved gently, the ink fading near the edges. The forged one looked like someone trying too hard to imitate softness and failing miserably. Looking back now, I should have seen it coming. I pointed to the bottom corner. The pressure changes here. Whoever wrote this wasn't left-handed like my mother. He stared at the page, horror settling into his features. She made me believe you were never born. That Maura fooled me. He closed his eyes. That she took money and vanished. He looked older then, smaller somehow. The kind of man who finally realizes he wasn't betrayed by a lover, but by blood. Finally, he lifted his head and met my eyes. You exist. You were mine. I didn't look away. I've always been yours. You just never came looking. His face crumpled, not dramatically, not theatrically, but with the quiet devastation of someone who just met the ghost of the life he should have lived. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. The silence between us in that conference room lingered long after I left. It followed me down the hallway, into the elevator, and all the way home. I felt it sitting at the table with me that night, heavy as a hand pressed against my chest. I couldn't shake the look on Harlan's face, the shock, the guilt, the kind of grief that shows up only when a man realizes he wasn't just fooled, he was used. And beneath all of that, the truth I'd thrown at him like a stone, you just never came looking. Those words stayed with me long after I wished they would fade. By the next morning, the quiet had curdled into something sharper. I heard it before I opened my eyes, a voice in the kitchen, low and shaking. Harlan's. He had called my mother, or someone close enough to her, that his voice carried the same tremor I'd heard from him yesterday. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to Catherine. She's alive, he said. Each word sounded like it dragged blood from his throat. Her name is Rosie, and you lied. I'd never heard a man sound both furious and heartbroken at the same time. Every syllable carried 20 years of betrayal. There was a pause. Then Catherine's voice, smooth, unbothered, cold enough to cut glass. I saved you. That girl and her mother would have destroyed everything. Destroy everything. The phrase burrowed into me, twisting. To her, I wasn't a child. I wasn't even a mistake. I was a threat to her empire, her image, her perfectly crafted legacy. The kind of threat she could eradicate with a single forged letter. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. A hard thud came. Next, Harlan slamming the phone onto the counter. He exhaled shakily and said to someone in the room, I want every scholarship recipient rechecked. Every name she blocked. His voice carried a kind of determination I hadn't yet decided whether to trust. That's where the fight truly started. Later that morning, I sat on my bed, my laptop warm against my knees. I opened my old scholarship emails, the ones I used to read until my chest hurt from the disappointment. I scanned through them, one by one, trying to ignore the sting of old failures. Then I found it, a finalist position I never knew I held. Declined. Incomplete Guardian documentation. A small detail, just a line in an email, but enough to open a fresh wound. I checked the organization name. The Catherine H. Adams Foundation. My chest tightened. She didn't just erase me from a family. She erased me from opportunity. She had cut my future apart before it even had a chance to breathe. I should have seen it coming. By the afternoon, I found myself standing in the polished lobby of the Adams Foundation. The receptionist recognized Harlan's name and guided me toward a boardroom filled with people in suits. The kind of people who didn't look up unless the room demanded it. Catherine was already there, seated at the head of the table, spine perfectly straight, pearls wrapped around her neck like armor. Her eyes flicked to me and tightened as if my presence alone polluted the air. Harlan entered behind me, carrying 2 envelopes. He placed them on the glass table with a soft but devastating thud. "You didn't just lie," he said, his voice steady but trembling at the edges. "You forged Maura's voice." Catherine lifted her teacup. Calm, detached. "You needed protecting," she replied. "I did what mothers do." The cruelty in her certainty made my skin prickle. Harlan pushed the forged letter toward her. "You broke us. You broke me. You made me believe she abandoned me. You made me believe my own daughter never existed." The board members shifted in their seats, uncomfortable with the spectacle of their queen being challenged. Catherine didn't look at the paper. Families rise or fall based on decisions like mine. You would never have become who you are if she had stayed. I stepped forward then. My voice didn't shake. "She's not part of this meeting," Catherine snapped. I met her glare head on. "I'm part of everything you tried to bury." The room went still. One board member, a woman with soft gray hair, turned to Catherine. Her tone was quiet but firm. "Is this true, Mrs. Adams?" Catherine's lips parted, but no words came. Her silence wasn't dignified. It wasn't powerful. It was cornered, exposed. The kind of silence that shows the truth more clearly than any confession. I felt Harlan move beside me. Slowly, he placed a hand on my shoulder, not claiming, but steadying. "You're not erased anymore," he said. "You're written back in." And for the first time in 25 years, someone in that family said my name without shame. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. By the time I opened the envelope that arrived in the mail, I'd already rehearsed every possible reaction in my mind. I peeled back the flap, my fingers trembling, just slightly, just enough to remind me I was alive. The invitation read, "Adams Foundation Honoring Youth Gala, 1 guest." There was my name in fine print. Our DOE volunteer staff. The mockery hit me like a gust of cold wind. I thought I had been written back in, but this felt like being handed a pen with no ink. Looking back now, I should have known the joke wasn't done yet. I showed the invitation to Harlan in the morning. He frowned, the crease between his brows digging deeper than I'd seen before. "They're baiting me," he muttered. "They'll try something." I nodded, though I felt the world shifting under both our feet. That's where it all started. The night of the gala, the marble lobby of the hotel shone like a mirror, reflecting chandeliers, tuxedos, and champagne flutes, but it didn't reflect me. My dress was modest, navy blue, and quiet. I told myself I was here for validation, for the moment when I'd hear my name announced, Rosie Adams, and feel the weight of truth inch forward. Instead, at the check-in desk, the attendant glanced at the invitation, then looked back at me. "You're listed as volunteer staff, miss," she said, a trace of sorry in her voice. I managed a polite smile. There must be a mistake. Her nod was polite, but the look in her eyes said it all. "You don't belong here." I stepped into the ballroom, and my heels clicked in protest. Whispers trailed behind me. A voice like warm pearls floated over from the crowd. I thought they said she was the intern's daughter. In that moment, the spotlight didn't seek me. It ignored me, and I felt the painful kind of invisible. My throat tightened. I swallowed. Even when invited, I'm still not welcome. Walking out felt like pulling myself from quicksand. I ignored the cameras, the applause, the performance. I ignored the role I'd been written into. I left. That night at my apartment, I sat in the dark. The envelope from Odessa appeared at the door, handwritten and trembling. I couldn't keep it anymore. Inside was a yellowed photograph. Maura and Harlan under the magnolia tree behind the mansion, smiles wide, hope unmasked, and below that, a crisp note, a confession in ink. She loved him. He loved her. But your grandmother loved control more. My chest clenched. An old wound ripped wider. I held the photo against my heart. The truth had always found a way in, no matter how high the wall. I stood and carried the invitation to the trash. I watched the gold letters flutter in the bin and felt a strange release. They don't get to narrate my origin anymore. I opened my laptop and began typing a title. The blood they tried to forget. A memoir. Keys clicked in the night. My heart hammered with clarity. I wasn't writing for eyes that refused to see me. I was writing for myself, and for the daughter I always was. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. The night after the gala felt unnaturally still, like the world was holding its breath just long enough for me to hear my own resolve forming. My laptop was still open on the table, the memo of my memoir glowing faintly in the darkness. I stared at it for a moment longer, letting the weight of everything settle. I didn't know what would come of what I'd begun, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. They didn't get to tell my story anymore. I would. That's where the next turn began. I had just stepped into the hallway when the shrill ring of my mother's phone cut through the quiet. The sound didn't belong in our apartment at this hour. It carried the wrong kind of urgency. I moved toward her door, drawn by instinct rather than curiosity. Maura answered on the second ring. Her voice, normally soft even when tired, tightened into something thinner. Hello. I stopped outside the doorway. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the tone that flowed through the tiny speaker made my spine pull tight. Catherine. Her voice was smooth, too smooth, like someone stirring poison into honey. You've raised her into a liability, she said. This is exactly why you should have stayed gone. The words landed with the clean precision of a blade. Not shouted, not emotional, just factual cruelty, the kind I'd heard from people who believed they were untouchable. Maura didn't respond right away. I could hear her breath hitching, the same way it did when she tried to hide fear behind a polite smile. Catherine, please stop calling here. Why? Afraid she'll hear me? The older woman's voice dipped lower, dripping disdain. Afraid she'll realize you ruined her life before she even had one? My hand curled around the doorframe. I could almost feel the paint creak beneath my grip. Maura whispered something. I couldn't make out what. Before hanging up, the silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It felt like someone had broken into our home without stepping through the door. You reached into my home again. Not this time. I stepped back before she saw me and returned to the living room my pulse steadying into something sharper. At the edge of my laptop screen, my cursor blinked, patient, expectant, like it knew what was about to change. 2 days passed before the second blow came. An email arrived. Family brunch, clarifying misunderstandings. I clicked it open. A line stood out, as bold and careless as a slap. Guest, +1 to Harlan Adams. No name, no identity, no acknowledgement. I stared at it until the letters blurred. Maura came in quietly behind me, scanning my expression before she spoke. "You don't have to go," she murmured. "Let them stew in their own bitterness. It's not worth." "It is," I said, turning the screen toward her. "Because they didn't just steal my name. They stole my arc. They wrote me out before I even arrived." Maura's eyes softened. "Rosie, I don't want you hurt again." "I'm not the scandal," I said calmly. "I'm the story." She didn't argue after that. The next morning, I dressed in a plain black suit, not fancy enough to impress, not modest enough to hide. It was armor. Nothing more, nothing less. I tied my hair back and slipped the printed first chapter of my memoir into a folder. I didn't bother rehearing what I'd say. Some truths didn't need practice. Catherine's estate looked the same as the night I'd first seen my mother tending someone else's roses. Perfect, orderly, cold. When I rang the bell, she answered herself. Her eyes flicked over me like I was a receipt she didn't remember approving. "You weren't on the list." I smiled lightly. "You just haven't updated your files in 25 years. She stiffened. It was small, but I saw it. The beginning of a crack. "I want you to stop this nonsense," she said. "You've stirred up enough trouble." I opened the folder and held out the chapter, neatly bound. "Every lie you told is now dated and documented." Her face paled. "Not much, but enough." "You think anyone will believe her?" she asked, her voice shaking ever so slightly. "A girl raised in a shoebox. A woman who ran away like a coward. You think a story can undo what I built?" "No," I said gently, "but the truth can." For a moment, she looked at me as if she couldn't decide whether to slam the door or throw the pages into the fireplace. She chose the door. The slam echoed down the porch, but all it did was steady me. She wanted silence. I gave her a story instead. I walked to my car calmly, the kind of calm that arrives when you decide you're done asking permission. Back home. I uploaded the chapter to the shared folder with my editor, typed a subject line that felt like closure. Truth, final revision. Then I hit send. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. The day after I sent the revised chapter to my editor, the air around me felt different, charged, expectant, as if the world knew something was coming long before I did. I tried to distract myself with routine, folding laundry, wiping the counters, reminding my mother to rest. But nothing settled. My thoughts kept circling back to Catherine, to her voice seeping into my home like a draft I couldn't shut out. And beneath all of it, that steady conviction pulsed through me again. She wanted silence. I gave her a story instead. That's where the next unraveling began. 3 days after the brunch email, I met an old college friend for coffee. Madison had been someone I once leaned on, study sessions, late-night ramen, the kind of friendship that feels easy until it doesn't. She drifted away junior year, offering excuses I didn't question at the time. People grew apart. That's what I told myself. That's what she let me believe. But the moment she walked into the cafe, I sensed something brittle in her posture. She didn't hug me. She didn't even smile properly. She just sat down and wrapped her hands around the mug like she needed something solid to hold. "Rosie," she began, "I owe you an apology." My heart tightened. Apologies rarely come without a wound attached. "I should have told you years ago," she continued, tapping her fingers nervously. "Back in school, someone from the Adams Foundation contacted me, asked me to keep an eye on you." The words didn't make sense at first. They just hung between us, suspended in disbelief. "I didn't know what I was part of," she added quickly. "I thought it was about safety, maybe scholarships, something harmless. But then they kept asking about your mother, about where she worked, about your plans. And I realized," she swallowed hard, "I realized I was reporting on you." Heat crept up my neck. Not embarrassment, no, betrayal, the kind that seeps deeper the longer you look at it. She wasn't just watching me. She was documenting my erasure. I didn't shout. I didn't break down. I just nodded, thanked her for telling me now, even though it should have been then, and walked out without finishing my drink. My footsteps on the pavement felt heavier than they should have, like each step pulled the truth further into the light. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. While I was out, my phone buzzed with a message from Harlan. "Come to the estate. There's something you need to see." I hesitated only long enough to steady my breath. Then I boarded the first bus heading toward the neighborhood I once thought only belonged to other people. When I arrived, Harlan met me at the back entrance. He didn't speak, not at first. His face carried the same shaken expression I'd seen the day he read Maura's real letter. He led me through the hallways quietly, past portraits of stern-faced ancestors and immaculate silver frames that held everything but the truth. Finally, he stopped at a wooden door with an older lock. "I never had the key," he murmured. "She kept this room to herself." But he had pried it open earlier, the splintered wood along the frame, confirming that. He pushed the door gently, and I stepped inside. The room wasn't large, but it held decades of secrets in its silence. Stacks of boxes, labeled correspondence 2005 to 2006, filled the shelves. Drawers were stuffed with envelopes, some sealed, some torn open violently. And on the desk, arranged with eerie precision, were pieces of a life Catherine had stolen. Letters from Maura, unopened. A sonogram photo, my sonogram. A handwritten card from Odessa, wishing joy for the new baby. None of it had been shown to Harlan. My breath caught, not from sadness, but from the magnitude of cruelty on display. It wasn't enough that she erased my mother. She had erased me too, twice. But the final blow was a red folder sitting apart from the rest. Harlan handed it to me without speaking. Inside was my original birth certificate. My name was there in black ink, Rosie Mae Bennett. Beneath it, in the space marked father, someone had crossed through Harlan James Adams with a thick stroke of red pen and stamped beneath in bold letters. Invalid. Not legally, not officially, but socially, emotionally, deliberately. She had all of me and chose to keep none of it. I held the paper tightly, my hands trembling, but no tears came. My body felt too rigid for crying, like grief had transformed into something hotter, more precise. I pulled out my phone and texted Odessa. How long did she plan to pretend I never existed? Her reply came within minutes. Forever. But forever just ended. That's where the shift truly happened. I carried the documents home in a sealed envelope, guarding them like fragile organs. Under the dim lamp of our living room, I laid everything on the table: my birth certificate, Mora's letters, the sonogram, a life restored in scattered pieces. Then I opened my laptop, scanned each item, and uploaded them into a secure drive. Not to destroy someone, not to humiliate anyone, but to correct the record of my own existence. The next morning, I mailed a package to a lawyer recommended by a friend at the clinic. It contained copies of every document Catherine had hidden. The letter I included was short, direct. I'm requesting amendments to all public records related to my birth, not financial claims, not inheritance, only the truth. When I sealed the envelope, I felt something loosen inside me, a knot I'd carried since childhood finally untying itself. She rewrote my birth. I'm rewriting the world that led her. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. The morning before the community event felt strangely calm, like the world had stepped aside to let me breathe for the first time in weeks. The legal documents were sent. The truth was in motion, and the knot that had lived inside my chest since childhood was finally loosening, slowly, painfully, but unmistakably. I didn't know what would come of it, but I knew I wasn't hiding anymore. That's where the next reckoning began. 1 week after mailing the documents, Harlan called and asked if I could join him at the City Hall courtyard. His tone was nervous, too nervous for a man who spent most of his life speaking to crowds without blinking. I hesitated, thinking of Mora resting at home, still fragile in ways she didn't want to admit. But something in me knew this wasn't about showmanship. This was about truth finally stepping into daylight. When I arrived, the courtyard was filled with folding chairs, volunteers, and a small podium draped with a banner, Community Renewal Awards. Local families, officials, and reporters gathered beneath the morning sun. My pulse quickened when I saw Harlan waiting near the stage, his hands clasped tightly. He motioned me forward. "You ready?" he asked softly. I wasn't not for this kind of exposure, not for this public crossing of lines that had been drawn around my life before I was even born. But I nodded anyway, because sometimes courage isn't loud. Sometimes it's just walking toward the thing that once terrified you. We stepped onto the stage together. A hush fell over the crowd. Harlan approached the microphone first. His voice wavered slightly before finding its footing. "This year's event is personal for me," he began. "For decades, I believed a lie. I believed my daughter didn't exist, that she was a mistake that never took a breath." A murmur went through the audience. A few heads turned toward me. My heart thumped once, heavy, insistent. "The truth," he continued, "isn't always convenient, but it is necessary. This is my daughter, Rosie, and she is real. She always was." That single sentence, "she always was," unraveled something deep inside me. Looking back now, I should have seen the grief in his voice. Someone handed me the microphone. My fingers shook slightly as they brushed the metal, but I steadied myself with a slow inhale. The crowd blurred for a moment, faces blending into the same vague shape of expectation. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just spoke. For a long time, people told me I was a mistake. I said, a stain, a silence. But I wasn't silence. I was someone's heartbeat before I ever had a name. A hush swept over the courtyard. Even the breeze seemed to hold still. I didn't grow up with the truth. I grew up with its outline, missing pieces, missing names, missing chances. But the story didn't end there. It's ending here, in daylight, with my own voice. I opened the first chapter of my memoir, the chapter that traced my mother's courage, my father's ignorance, and Catherine's ruthless control. I read a paragraph that carried the weight of all the missing years. When I finished, a few people wiped their eyes. Others stared at me with something like recognition, like they understood what it meant to claw your way out of someone else's version of your life. Catherine wasn't there, but everyone knew she was meant to be. The event ended with applause that felt too large, too overwhelming. But beneath it all, I sensed something shifting, firmly, finally, in my direction. That's where the next goodbye began. 2 nights later, I visited the cemetery. The air was cool, the ground damp from a light rain. Catherine had died from a stroke, quietly, suddenly leaving behind a legacy built on fear and fragile pride. Her grave sat under a tall oak, covered in lilies brought by donors and acquaintances hoping to stay in good graces with a woman who no longer held power over them. I stood at the edge of the plot for a long time, looking down at the name carved into stone. It felt strange seeing it there. Catherine H. Adams, so final and so fragile at once. In my hand was an unopened envelope, one I had written the day she slammed the door in my face. It held a photograph and a sentence I never said aloud. I knelt, the grass cool beneath my knees. The lilies released a faint, sweet fragrance. I held the envelope in front of me, then pulled it back. Some things didn't belong with the dead. Some things belonged to the living. So I stood, slipping the envelope back into my coat pocket, and turned away from the grave without leaving anything behind. I walked toward my car slowly, not in sorrow, but in clarity. She wanted legacy. She got loneliness. She taught me to vanish. I taught myself to return. A voice called out as I reached the parking lot. A reporter, young, eager, microphone raised. Any last words about Catherine Adams? Miss Bennett? I paused, looked back once at the grave, then at him. She forgot I had a voice. Then I walked away. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. 6 months later, the world around me had changed, but not in the grand, cinematic way people often expect. There was no confetti, no parade of justice, just sunlight filtering through the windows of a quiet coastal house, the sound of waves folding against sand, and a stillness I'd never known I could earn. That's where this kind of healing begins, not with fanfare, but with peace. The cottage I shared with Maura sat just beyond the dunes. It wasn't large, but it was enough. Enough space to breathe. Enough room for our stories to hang unjudged on the walls. The living room smelled like lavender oil and used books. There were no locks on drawers here. No hidden compartments. Only shelves filled with truth. Maura taught part-time at a local college, now literature classes. I think she liked how the classics let her say things she couldn't yet speak aloud. Some mornings, I'd find her quoting Baldwin under her breath while folding towels. And me, I worked at a small community clinic a few blocks from the bay. I didn't wear a name tag. I didn't need one anymore. Each morning before the sun climbed fully over the water, I sat by the window and journaled. Some days I wrote about memory, others about forgiveness, sometimes about neither, just what it felt like to have coffee in a house where no one raised their voice. The memoir had been published last month. Modestly, quietly. It wasn't a bestseller, but it had reached people who needed it, and somehow that felt bigger than any spotlight. I thought healing would be loud. Turns out it's soft, like tide over sand. That's where the echo started to settle. I still kept the envelope I never left on Catherine's grave. It sat in a drawer, unopened, until one gray morning when the wind pushed in stronger than usual. Something nudged me to revisit it, not to stir pain, but to understand it. I opened it slowly. Inside was a photograph I hadn't remembered seeing before. Me, as a baby, wrapped in a yellow blanket, being held by Mora beneath a large oak tree. Someone else had taken that photo. On the back, in Catherine's elegant handwriting, was a date and 2 words, under control. My stomach clenched, but I didn't tear the picture. I didn't scream. Instead, I lit a match, took the photo outside, and watched the flames eat through the edges. I didn't burn it out of rage. I burned it for release. Not every memory deserves a frame. That afternoon, Harlan visited. He didn't announce it, just showed up on the porch, holding a copy of his new book. He looked older, but not frail, just softened, like someone who'd begun telling the truth and couldn't stop. "This is for you," he said, handing it over. The dedication page was simple. "To my daughter, who taught me to face the truth I feared most." He sat for tea, talked about a foundation he was building, not one named after Catherine, one focused on children like me who never got the benefit of the doubt. Before he left, he asked, "Can I come again sometime?" I held his gaze. "Not yet," I said, "but maybe someday." He nodded. No bitterness, just a quiet acceptance. We hugged, briefly, tentatively, but it was real. That's where forgiveness starts, not as surrender, but as boundary. Later that night, I opened my inbox and found a message from a teenage girl in Ohio. She had read my book. Her words were shaky, but they found me. I thought I was the only one. "Your story helped me stop hiding. Thank you." I replied simply, "You're not alone. You never were." I closed my laptop, heart fuller than I expected. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long gold over the floor. In the center of the living room stood a framed photo, not of Catherine, not of Harlan, but of Mora, young, tired, radiant. Beneath it, a small silver plate I had engraved last week. It held words I'd once whispered only to myself, but now lived boldly in my home. The truth won't always be loud, but it always echoes. The story didn't end when I was born. It began the moment I chose to speak. Sometimes the loudest justice is spoken in silence. Rosie didn't fight with fists. She didn't beg to be seen. She simply told the truth and walked away. So let me ask you, have you ever had to reclaim a story someone else tried to erase? If this resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe. More stories like this, real, raw, and unforgettable, are coming next.